He has a three-part series. The three-part series to his experience at special schools. So let's hear what he has to say. So we'll play them back to back, and then we'll now come to the discussion section. So let me. So yeah, I just want to say, so I mean, before then, yeah, I've spoken about her then. Here is where this is the Brian video who just watched. Here is an audio recording, so listen to it. It's around another of my, my colleague Zuleika Abrahams. She talks about exploring the lived experiences of primary caregivers of children with VI. Then you reading these articles, you will now reflect on it. Very, very important to listen to. Then this one is around, let's see, this is, I think this is, this is my colleague also will taught on the same course. She goes deep into part of that incidental learning for learners with visual impairment. Okay. So how visual impairment affects learning. And this is the one with Benedict, which we're going to listen to now. Then if we go further down, here's a little bit of the project we ran during the TEDdy, it's called TEDdy project. It was run by, Professor Mackenzie. So I was also part of it. So it's where they use Lego as a means of teaching, as a means of inclusion for learners with visual impairment. So you can listen and watch the video there to know more about it. Then in this section, I think this is Suna. Yeah, this Suna going deeper into classroom, creating empowering classrooms. Okay, so you can listen to that later at your own time. Deal about Perkins School for the Blind, what they do. Okay, read about that. Then you just answer a few questions using this scenario, Amina's scenario. Okay, you read through Amina's scenario and you answer some questions on the reflection, part 20. Then the online activity, which is not for marks, as we said. No, sorry. This is the interaction we're going to have on Thursday. Yeah, interaction we're going to have on Thursday. And then textbook chapters for you to also engage with as you get more time. And then the last video, like I said, is over 2 hours long. That one, if you have the time, is the full video lecture of Suna. So if you have time, you can go through that. There's a lot more to learn about it. And Ola 5 is just interrogating you into the different aspects which we learned this week. Okay, so the expanded core curriculum, how will you explain it, in one sentence, the signs to look out for, which Suna spoke about, if you have a child with visual impairment, and then how UDL, with its integration in the school, how that, how you can explain how they come together or are different, or if you find any things that are contradictory in both of them. Okay. And then this is just reflecting on the textbook chapters. Once you read them, just do the reflection. Yeah. Okay. So that's the entirety of the week. A lot of content to cover. So for you to get through. Okay. So let's start with Benedict's voice recording. Start with the first one. Insight into the education of blind learners in South Africa, part 1, 2, and 3. So let's start with part 1. So they're not too long, the videos. Yeah, this one is 10 minutes. Okay. Let me just make it bigger. Okay.
Good day, everyone. My name is Benedict Khumalo. I am an employee here at IDEA Unit. I work mainly with some of your lecturers, so my sort of work evolves around course design, research, and I often say I'm a jack of all trader within the academic space. You'll find me lecturing, researching, even course or curriculum structuring. But my main focus obviously would be on accessibility because I am a visually impaired person or a blind person, as one would say. So for today, I would like us to talk, or I'll be sharing a little bit about the special schools in South Africa, or the schools for the blind learners. For obvious reasons, I am blind, as I've said before, and surprisingly, my master's research focused primarily on special schools' perceptions of their position and their role within the inclusive education framework. So what I've done, I've interviewed educators and principals to find out where do they find themselves in this landscape of inclusive education. And I'll also be sharing a little bit about learners' experience of inclusive, learners' experience of being in a special schools. What research inform us about the learners at the schools for the blind? It might also be a bit more personal because I spent my entire years at a special school. So what I'll be sharing is exactly what I also went through. So those are the two main sort of aspects that I'll be talking about today. The special schools, educators' perceptions, and the learner's experience. So in South Africa, we have 23 blind special schools. Each province would, the Western Cape has 2, Free State has 2. I think the majority could be in the Limpopo or Eastern Cape. I could be completely wrong. But all of those, interesting that all of these schools were sort of formed by the missionaries way back in the 60s, 70s, to sort of represent the geographical areas or the Group Areas Act of those days. You'll find that a school in Bophuthatswana, back in my school I attended to, was in Free State, but when it was found, it was under Bophuthatswana, which meant that all the learners would be learning Setswana as sort of their home language, and then they saw us in in Eastern Cape to be South Cape and then Zulu and so on. But then you find in Gauteng province, at least they might find a multi sort of lingual special schools for the blind, Philadelphia and so on. So, but then why do our parents opted to take us to special schools? What was happening in their mind? So back then, there was that assumption or belief that special schools are the best place for learners with disabilities. If some of you who knows the Marxist theory, you'd know that it was around the economy that because we can't work, so the only place is to remove persons with disability far away from the community and put them in a shelter. But what we have found with the special schools was that there was this belief that these schools are the best place for visually impaired persons because they all look alike. And so it might be easier for them to cope with life, which could be true. That, I mean, we all looked alike and there was nobody who could tease, although we did tease each other about certain things, but not necessarily blindness as a focal point of our teasing. And the other reason why parents opted to take us, blind learners, to special schools is purely, again, on the assumption that these schools are well-resourced and have well-qualified educators and principals to deal with blind and visually impaired persons. So you found that in the school, the assumption was an educator has a qualification in blindness, therefore they would be able to transfer knowledge easily to Benedict, who's blind, unlike in a mainstream school where the conventional method of teaching would not work. But those are the assumptions that when special schools were designed or were formed, people had those assumptions that we are doing something good for these people or for those people, as one might say. But then what do we know about special schools or schools for the blind? If I say special schools, just know that I'm referring to schools for the blind. What do we know? Currently, there has been some research done about the schools for the blind or the special schools. One I can think of the Teddy report, which I believe that as a DSE student, at some point in your class, you should have engaged or have a look at that report. There was another report done in 2015 by Section 27 with Blind SA, where they primarily looked at the schools for the blind in South Africa. There's another one called the Human Rights Watch. It was in 2015. So all of those three reports, when you have time, and the monitoring and evaluation report, I think that one is 2017 from government. I'll ensure that by the end of this presentation of my talk, when you get your resources, these readings are part of the resources that you will be getting if you have not received them. So what those reports informed us about the schools for the blind is that A, there is a lack of resources. Remember earlier on I said there was assumption that special schools are the best place because they've got all the resources that blind kids need. They've got braille and computers with all the resources. But what the report have said is that absolutely not. Actually, there's a dearth of those resources. There's a high shortage of those resources. They are highly needed. What I found for me in my study was that also is, in addition to lack of resources, some of the resources that are given to the educators, they found them to be not quite useful. For instance, a teacher would say, we have received an Apex, which is an electronic device. It's more like a tablet. But the problem with it, if it only has certain lanes, so it makes it very difficult for for reading sessions, because a child needs to, after reading one line, start again, press, and then to the next line, which sort of disrupt the flow of reading. Or what again we found from the report is that in these schools for the blind or special schools, low battery, your Mac will sleep soon unless plugged into a found that special schools do have, or the educators in these schools are not well equipped or not well trained to teach visually impaired persons. Now, I'm quickly going to get up my charger, Chantal.
All right, so let's end that there, because the next section is when he has gotten his charger. So let me stop this and we'll go to the second part. It's just 9 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to part 2. So I was still talking about what we have found to be the truth about the special schools which contradict what people have always had as assumptions about the truth and the reasons why visually impaired learners need to be sent to special schools. So in part one, I end up talking about the resources and what is happening there. And now I'm talking about the educators who we have found that they don't have sufficient skills or they are not well trained to teach blind and visually impaired learners. Here to give a typical, well, a quote from my participants in the study. One participant said, look, when I employ a teacher from a tertiary, I would have to take, off that teacher 3 months just to teach them about the blind learner, learning Braille, which is essential skill for any any learner in the school. So that means if they employ a teacher for the first 3 months, that teacher will not be doing any work, will just be trained, receiving some training. And that's only sort of minimal work that the school could do to try and remedy. But you do find that even those that might know Braille, they are still not well equipped enough to teach blind and visually impaired learners. But not to say that these people are horrible. I mean, I'm part of the system and look at where I am now. I am currently doing my 4th postgraduate. So clearly if the system was not working, I won't be where I am. But I'm not saying at all that they are terrible people, but I'm just saying that there's a bit of a concern in as far as the training that they receive from the training institutions, which is why I often applaud the work that IDEA and the DSC at UCT and other institutions are doing to try and maybe bridge that gap. The other lacking thing that we found in the special schools or schools for the blind is the non-teaching staff. Here I'm talking about the psychologist, O&M, orientation and mobility. Those people play a critical role in aiding visually impaired learners around mobility. How do I walk from point A to B? Somebody need to come and teach me how do I work, how do I walk from my office to my colleague's office or so on, even how to hold a cane, those that are using guide dogs and so on. And then you might find also people like the O&M for daily living skills. How do blind learners learn how to make a cup of tea, because sometimes parents are so afraid. So the school is supposed to bridge that gap. I'm sure you should have learned or touched more on this when you did the ECC curriculum, which is quite a crucial learning elements of any child. So you can imagine for a blind learner. So those are some of the few sort of key areas that research has found to be lurking or to be found with the special schools or schools for the blind, which sort of contradict the overall assumptions about the special schools. But now, most importantly, I'm going to talk about the learner's experience, because it's one thing to talk about the school not having that and that, but how do these kids that are there feel or experience special school? I went to a special school myself, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, and I must say it was great. It was fantastic.
New notification, 5 minutes left in your meeting.
We were all the same. There were no barriers. Sorry, it's my screen reader speaking there. We were almost sort of harmonious or homogeneous blind people with partially sighted. So if you look at it from that context, you could say it was great. However, what we lacked is the integration with the outside world, because a special school, yes, it's there, but it's not like we are completely isolated from the community. We knew what is happening outside of our corridors, outside of our schools. And like I used to say to my friends that when I was at school, these were way in the beginning when SABC was starting to have, I think they were already in there, continue to present us the Wild Room. I used to watch a lot of Wild Room. So I would see myself with people like Sade, Saifo, and those sort of teenagers were on TV. I saw myself in them because I believed I'm vibrant and up there. But unfortunately, because I'm in a special schools, that did not really go well with me. I found myself to be slightly offish, not connecting with the world. I found myself not linking with what is everybody is doing outside. At some point, I felt like I could be more like delusional because here I am inside of me. I see myself as being vibrant, young, blind person. Yet at the same time, I know I'm in a special school. So my peers, when I go home, they talk about doing this. I can't. I'm in a special schools. And also our experience with the careers. We did not have sufficient subjects like the STEM subjects in my school, which even now is still a bit of a crisis. Most special schools or schools for the blind, they don't provide pure mathematics. I think I only know one school that tried, but again, it was more if the teacher is willing to go extra mile and see, look at the possibility of doing that. Other than that, it doesn't work, which for me is a bit of a concern and a crisis because that limits our chances of moving to tertiaries, our chance of careers. That is why in most cases, when you find blind and visually impaired persons at the universities, the majority of them end up doing the humanities, social science, law, even to some degree, politics. You'd never find us moving towards the commerce or the commercial law purely because of the foundation. But a couple of, when I moved to Cape Town, I found a friend who was blind like us, but she was doing computer science, which to me, we felt as, wow, that's amazing. But it also shows how if the teachers are willing and are well informed, anything is possible. So those are some of the sort of the barriers, or if one could say, and even the difficult positions that we find ourselves to be in the special schools. And then I'd like to move on now to educators' perceptions of inclusive education, because I spoke about our experiences, even what we find in the special schools. So how then, when taking everything that I said, the educators and the principals view the Education White Paper 6, which was promulgated 23 years ago, if then we know that they lack resources, they are not well qualified to teach blind learners, and the schools are in some deplorable conditions. What then is their position of and their perceptions of inclusive education? What is their role in inclusive education? Sally.
Okay, the second part. Let's go to the last part.
So for this part 3, I would like to talk about inclusive education. But before, let me just quickly give a quick rep. So in part 2, I mainly focused more on I ended off where I was discussing what do we know about the special schools. And then I moved swiftly to learners' experiences of the special schools. How do we view special schools and where has that led us? Now, in this section, which is the last section, I'm going to talk briefly about my research, which looked at the educators' perceptions of inclusive education, because we know that in the beginning, I said the assumption was special schools are well resourced for visually impaired persons. It was the assumption. Yet, what the research has informed us was that no, actually, these people are not well resourced. Yes, they lack certain skills. And then the learners, they also informed us of sort of the challenges that they have with the curriculum and so on. Now, the policy itself says educators are going to be resources for educators of special schools need to be or are going to be resources or resourcing inclusive education. In other words, if my parents want to decide to take me to a special school, to a mainstream school, the policy allows them they're supposed to be well equipped to say to my parents, okay, if you take Benedict from our school to school B, this is what you need. We will go with Benedict and make sure that we do awareness. We make sure that all the educators, they are aware of his needs and how to teach him. But as we know, they also lack. So now, where does all of this leave their role and their position? And what does it mean about the future of the special schools? And from what I could gather, is that we are still at an infant stage in as far as understanding inclusive education, because I found the educators, for me, they are not they don't really know the provisions of inclusive education. Yes, they do know about inclusive education, but the policy is sometimes completely vague to them. It's out of their scope of work, which means there's a lack of awareness and campaigning from whoever is supposed to be doing it. And again, the most important, which is the critical part, the teaching and learning. They have not been well equipped with skills and techniques so to take this new role. So now, in conclusion, I think for me, I'd like to say special schools where they are now, yes, we found them to be in such a very difficult position in as far as inclusive education is concerned, but they can be resourceful in as far as driving inclusive education. As you might have seen in some of the teachings that we have learned so far, how some educators are going their extra mile just to make sure they do provide teaching to their kids. So education, special education can still play a critical role, and yet and I think we also need to acknowledge the incredible work that you're doing with lack of knowledge and lack of resources, but they're doing such a phenomenal work. So yeah, thank you, Chantal, and thanks for the opportunity.
All right. So that's the 3-part series from Benedict, where he gave us a glimpse into he be someone who has gone through special school, gave us a glimpse into what the original assumptions were around special school. Because as you know, it comes from good intention, and it is still out of good intention to be able to include learners with disabilities. That's why special schools exist. They're meant to be, resource centers for mainstream schools, and the rest of it. But then he now says that after evidence from the various reports has shown that is not the case, and in many cases it's actually worse than we thought of, and especially that section 27, which looked into the 23 special schools for the blind, in South Africa, found very, very contrasting, provisions to what we thought was made available. But then he now pivoted and went to his experience of learners with visual impairment, at those special schools. And then lastly, about the educators and principals, what they think about inclusive, education. So it kind of tries to tie in from what we started from the beginning. Started off with what visual impairment is from SUNA, what we need to be aware of, what an inclusive classroom might look like, and how to include learners with visual impairment. So the skills, the practice, and then Brian came in and said, okay, don't go with skills practice as your only focus. You need to look at the experience of the learner. You need to look at, okay, do you understand the learner? Are you empathetic to the learner? Are you listening, to know the real issues, but also are you feeling or feeling how the learner is feeling and then thinking about it, in order to be able to, cover that emotional and almost unconscious aspects of experience of learners with visual impairment in our school. And now Benedict is coming in to give some of the practical things that actually happen, both with evidence and from the experiential part, his experience. So given all that, first of all, let's just talk about what aspects struck you, about what Benedict recounted. And then if you can just talk about that, what aspects struck you there. If you want to go for that, think around, okay, what would you say would be like steps you would take if we want to say, okay, we have a learner with visual impairment who is coming into your school now. What would be the steps that you think we likely take, to start discussing the inclusion of that learner in your school? Yeah. Anybody wants to weigh in? You can start, first of all, weigh in, what struck you around Benedict's video. Let me start off with this question. I don't know if I've talked about it before, but I was called to teach fourth year medical students at UCT. So during the lecture, one of the students stood up and he said, so these are students getting ready to to finish. They're going to become doctors. So one of the students got up and said, but how, it doesn't, honestly, I don't see, how will you include a person who is blind to become a surgeon? So for him, he doesn't see any reason why, that person needs to. And if you remember, Benedict hinted at that, talked about the STEM subjects, talked about students' visual impairment only going into the humanities, social sciences, and the rest of it. So that was the medical student asked me, say, how can, so he doesn't see any use for it, because how can a student with visual impairment become a surgeon? Yeah. So what do you think about that question? So three aspects that you can choose to go with any aspect. You can choose to talk about what you sense about the video, or the other question I talked about, if a learner who is visually impaired is coming to your school, what will you consider? Or this last question, which I spoke about. We don't have much time here. We have like 26 minutes to go. Anybody wants to come in? Cedric, yes, please go ahead.
I'm going to start with his point on his last point about the educators and the principal perceptions. We can start with the lack of skills. So obviously we will have to have educators who are skilled at dealing with learners with visual impairments. Because firstly, visual impairment is it also, like the other disabilities, it varies. You get your low vision, you get your blind, so you need to get teachers in who has experience dealing with children with visual impairments. Like you also mentioned, getting in inexperienced staff, you will have to send them for training. That takes 3 months. what will you do in the meantime? The learner's gonna fall behind in terms of his coursework. So, and then already that is a negative where the learner is concerned. Yeah, that's just one of my points for now.
Yes, you're very right. Very right. And one of the core essential things is a lecturer being aware to verbalize everything which they are teaching. So if you're sharing a PowerPoint, you see a picture, things like saying, "Oh, you see the picture on the top right-hand corner, blah blah blah." A person with visual impairment cannot see the picture, so it's about describing. That's one of the skills, a lecturer, because. So that's why that's why that training is important. You have to understand that we human beings are creatures of habit. We do things out of habit. So it takes a while for us to get out of a habit to learn how to do something differently. So a lecturer will need to get the training to start becoming accustomed to describing everything, verbalizing everything which they're teaching with. Because even sometimes when you see a lecturer, even me, sometimes, see a lecturer that has gotten a little bit of training, sometimes we default to the traditional way we teach. Oh, look at that picture. Oh, you can see this one is in this. You see the words in red. So when you say that, you see the words in red. A student who is blind cannot see any words in red. So you have to actually verbalize those words. You see the sentence, "I am going to school," described in red. Those kind of things. So you're very, very right. Training on how to adapt the curriculum and how to teach for learners with visual impairment is very, very important. And that's where, resourcing becomes critical also. Who came first? Cedric, I don't know if you came first. Let me give my team's thing is not loaded. Okay, it has loaded. Cedric, let me give, or is it a follow-up to what you've said? Otherwise, I would like Masabata to come in.
No, okay. So the second point is we keep on going back to the assumptions.
Yeah.
So awareness is very important. Not awareness for individuals alone. It's for the whole teaching staff. Like we said, even the non-teaching staff. That is very important, so that they are aware that there's a learner coming in that with a visual impairment, and what the needs of the student, and how we will be accommodate the student. Use that word, yeah, accommodate the student.
Yeah. So that's why I asked that question. If a learner with visual impairment is coming to your school, what will be your approach? Because remember, at the end of the day, we have to evolve into a DSC approach. I keep mentioning it. A DSC approach is a holistic approach. Okay. Thanks, Cedric. That's very true. Masabata, come in. Then when you finish, Masabata, I will solicit people who have not spoken before to also contribute. Masabata, go ahead.
Sorry, yes, Doctor. I think for me, I want to agree with him on the assumptions in terms of assuming that special schools are well resourced and also that there won't be any bullying. Those were the assumptions that I had before joining this course. Now, in terms of making sure that I accommodate a learner, I think I'm thinking around the issue of familiarizing the learner with the environment for mobility purposes, and also looking at how you integrate the ECC and the UDL, so that at least you are able to cater for the needs of that particular learner.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah. So O&M training, very critical. As a non-disabled people, won't be able to truly appreciate how important it is. They usually have an activity which some people with disabilities don't support fully, but they always say, you know what, half measures is better than nothing. So I'm sure you see this. You've probably witnessed these activities where able-bodied people are blindfolded, and they are giving canes to try and navigate the environment, so that they can try and get a feeling of what it is in the life of a person who is blind. And then also the either for the physical aspect, they put people on wheelchair, able-bodied people on wheelchair, and they say, okay, try and navigate around and things like that. So a little bit of what Masbata was talking about in terms of O&M. What do you, rather than saying, what do you think could be, what do you think could be the challenge with that approach, even though it helps? Or what could be the challenges with that approach in terms of raising awareness of the challenges of persons with disabilities? You know, like I said, blindfolding able-bodied people to experience challenge of people who are blind, and people putting people able-bodied people in wheelchairs to kind of try and appreciate the challenge of people with physical impairments. After that, now read what Ali said in the chat. People, do you think there were any challenge? What do you think could be the likely challenges for people with disabilities with that approach to sensitizing people? Okay, but I don't think about it, but what could be the likely challenge is that so that's why the person doing the training has to really point this out. It's very important. The likely challenge will be that there's a danger that people might think that is all there is to challenges of persons with disabilities. So people might get into the danger of thinking, oh, with a person who is blind, once they're able to navigate their way with the cane, then they're able to, once we're able to get that right, then that's all there is to it. The person with visual impairment will be fully included, to be able to fully participate, in terms of getting to lectures, and the rest of it. And you don't consider other aspects, such as person might have chronic pain, let's say someone in a wheelchair, person might meet with attitudinal issues, when they are trying to get into a building. We just spoke about people with guide dogs being denied, getting into a building, okay? It might be the person has familiarized themselves with the route, but someone who's taking out garbage decides to put the garbage cans on the pathway, which sighted people will be able to see and navigate themselves. But for a person with visual impairment, they've mapped out their way, and they meet new obstacles now, and they start wondering what is happening, those kind of things. So it's very important that whenever such training is happening, to say this is just a small percentage, small section of the challenges persons with visual impairment or persons with disabilities. It does not in any way represent the full experience of challenges which persons with disabilities is. So I don't go into that danger of thinking that, oh, this all there is to it. Okay, so that's why you hear some people with disabilities saying that they don't actually like it, but others say, you know what, any small measure to raise awareness is a gain, it's an advantage. But the educator or whoever is running training has to be very deliberate to say, okay, this is just introducing you to some of the aspects. It in no way represents the full experience. So that's why even when we're talking about empathy, you cannot really empathize with someone 100%. You can never experience 100% what the barriers and challenges someone is experiencing. It's the same thing when a man tries to feel empathetic to his wife who just gave birth to a baby. There's no way you can experience 100% what the woman has gone through. Okay, you can empathize, but yeah. But normally, once you can empathize and try and put yourself in the person's shoes, that's usually more than enough, for you to be able to go through it. Yeah. So then Masabata. No, we're going to Masabata already. Sorry. Who else wants to comment?
No, I wanted to add something, Dr. Ike.
Yes.
When we were talking about the challenges where someone might leave a rubbish bin on like as a distraction, I was thinking of the story that Doreen told earlier with regards to the kids who were extending their legs on the pathway. So those are some of the things. Hence, I was saying to her earlier, the issue of awareness becomes very, very important.
Yeah.
because we do these things knowingly. I'm sure these kids, they knew that this walking stick, it's sensing the distractions along the road, and they were doing this on purpose. So
Yeah,
those are
yeah.
the things that they would be faced with as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to go further with that. Look, people, those attitudes, those kind of attitudes. Look, I want to go further to talk about home training. Home training is very, I mean, how well do we train our children to respect other children, irrespective if they have a disability or not? Whenever I see a child, I don't know if you know, but Brian talks about it, Professor Wettermeyer talks, and it's very true. A bully is actually a fearful person. The person feels, because for you to go and start bullying somebody else, you have to be feeling little and small within yourself. Because that's what makes you feel, because you feel little and small within yourself, you can't handle it. And because of that, you need to show that you are actually grand and big by tormenting other people. A bully is actually a someone hurting inside because they feel insignificant. And the only way they can feel significant is because once you find someone who is secure within themselves, they don't need external validation. A bully needs external validation to feel that they are great. And that points to lack of home training. You need to go back to how was that person raised, and you start finding issues with that. So I want to go, it's not in this course, but that's one thing I'm bringing in as a lecturer, saying that when you find bullying happening, there's a problem with the home training. And that person is experiencing either insignificance or they're feeling little, and they now want to act it out, on people to be able to feel important. Because a bully is always someone who feels insignificant. And because of that, they need to act it out. Yeah. Because that's a very sad situation where you may not find learners or students, bullying a learner with disability and things like that. But it's also lack of awareness, because when I was younger, that's one of the changes that happened to me, because I also did this postgraduate diploma. When you did disability as diversity, if you remember, we did the unconscious motivations, like I said, to students in the first semester. I was able to realize that during my childhood, I was discriminatory to my cousin. My cousin had slurred speech. So it takes him a while to be able to voice what he wants to say. But I and the other cousins and everything, we started picking on him, So things like when we are going out, and then when he's coming to join us, we'll be discussing, chatting, but when he comes, we'll keep quiet. See? Very discriminatory practices. And by the time I realized that, everything has happened and everything, but these are one of the things that happen, bullying that happens during childhood. So part of it is lack of awareness, but the other part is also training. How do we raise children to be respectful of other children? Very, 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 very important. So I wanted to bring that part in. Alice says, special schools were justified as best place because best resources, but the research shows the opposite. So it makes me question, if the justification for segregation was empirically false from the start, what was actually doing who was actually doing the work of keeping these schools intact for decades? Yeah, that's a very good question. What was sustaining, what was keeping it going? Okay, that's a very good question. And it's a question you can bring in, reflect on it, bring it in as you do the discussions. The one thing you will find, just like Brian said, and Suna talked to you see that word they talk about, messiness is messy, gray areas. It's not a yes or a no. That's what you'll find in disability. And why disability inclusion is difficult for some is that we are trained in the fixing, in the curative way of inclusion. So that means, let's do this, we fix it. Disability tells you that you cannot just do one thing and fix it. It's an ongoing conversation, ongoing engagement, and people are not used to that. People are used to the medical, we do the surgery, we close it up, we stitch it up, we fixed it. That's what the society is built upon. So it's difficult for people to pivot from that is a way of life. You will keep reaching, you will keep seeing the issues, and we keep learning, and we keep improving, and we keep making the changes. Yeah. Cedric?
Yeah, just on that's a good point that you made. That is actually what I was trying to say now. It's about the surgery and stitching it up. Because just to get on to Alice's question. So I think it's policy. So it's just about filling the gap and making sure that the numbers are there. And that's the reason why these special schools were operating under-resourced, as we experienced with a video in, what is it, Equays, with the learners with disabilities
Eastern Cape. Yeah.
in the Eastern Cape. Yeah, that is what happened there. It's just to make up the numbers and make sure you are in line with policy, not actually in line, but this is the school. It's a special school. It is counted as stats, but they don't know what is happening at the school. That the school is under resourced, what the educators are experiencing, the principals. You saw in that one video, this principal was walking away from the interview. So yeah, it's just to fill the policy gap.
So Cedric, you're very right. And that's why the next course you guys are going to do, monitoring disability in society, is going to take you because of what Cedric is saying, you realize the importance of monitoring mechanisms. And that's part of, linking to what Alice was saying. Because monitoring mechanisms will then start to identify. Monitoring mechanism will, first of all, show us that our assumptions were wrong, in terms of what was happening in special schools, that was not actually what was happening, it was actually the opposite. Monitoring mechanisms will tell us where the views of people with disabilities are, discussions ableism, if it's still at deficit level medical, or as disability as diversity, or it has moved to real inclusion, which looks into the structural and systemic issues. Monitoring mechanism will point to, okay, even when someone is thinking around systemic and structural issues, if they are attitudinal issues, that also becomes a barrier, because it means that, because that's where you see that the Perkins Braille is there, the Braille machine to compile the books, everything is there, but it's not being used because of attitudinal issues. Okay, you start seeing that. So when you go into the next course, monitoring disability in society, you start picking up on how do you monitor the changes in terms of disability inclusion. When someone says, "Oh, we are inclusive," we've had this so many learners, just like Cedric was saying, the policy, is it really happening? Is it? So that's why in DSC approach, we look at access. Well, we need to move from access to full participation. And then from full participation, we need to look at achievement. It's only when those three come together, we can say, yes, we've increased the participation and learners with disabilities are included in education. Because most times it stops at access. It doesn't look at the full participation. And sometimes we look at full participation, are they achieving the goals, the outcomes of education? And I will say not just the outcomes, just like Benedict was talking about, the outcomes also means are learners with visual impairment or learners with disabilities able to get the jobs that they studied for? And are they able to go into STEM subjects to be able to become engineers, to be able to become those, achieve those different professions? So very, very important. Masabata says, wait, let me see. Avikile says, I may have caused throughout the session my connection. Oh, okay, her connection. Okay. Just make sure you watch the recording, Afikile. Okay, Masabata says, listen to Benedict, there's always been a challenge with special schools. He states it clearly when he refers to the upkeeping as assumptions. Yeah, we believe it, and yet it was not what was really happening. Yeah. It's in fact, when you read section 27, it's really shocking. The same shock, section 27, left in the dark report, the same shock we got from the Eastern Cape school. The analysis, so that means special schools weren't just under-resourced, they were structurally designed to keep blind learners apart, even when the justification collapsed. Yes, so it links you to first semester. If you remember, out of sight, out of mind. You start interrogating the unconscious motivations for special schools. Was Was the assumption mainly about, oh, this is the place that will best cater for our learners, with visual impairment, or was it, oh, let's just, put them far away, because so that if we don't see them, then we don't have to deal with the uncomfortable emotions we feel when we see disability. Yeah, when we feel disability. And if you remember linking into Musa Zulu's book and those unconscious motivations. Okay, so people who have not spoken, let me see. Others who have not spoken, do you want to add something? Sibonelo, Mbali, Kelebohile. Yeah. Any of you wants to add anything? We are 4 minutes out.
Good evening, everyone.
Sibonelo, okay. Mbali, then Sibonelo. Mbali, go ahead.
On your question that was asked by a student from medical school,
Yes.
who wants to be
thank you.
Who wants to be a surgeon but is blind?
Yeah.
That was the example. I think there are other means of serving if they want to be in medicine. They can do research. They can be part of research. They can do other parts of medicine if they want to be so much into, because we need to be realistic. There are it's called a disability because there are certain limitations they have than an everyday normal person. Not that I'm being insensitive, but that's the reality of it. Not that we're saying totally they shouldn't be involved in medicine, but there are other ways of being part of it. And that Benedict's lecture, I liked the fact that he mentioned, okay, I'm big on teacher training when it comes to disability. So he mentioned that there is a limited skill that teachers have, so they will have to be trained more because it takes away from the class when they get to be trained for 3 months, and even after the 3 months they still don't have enough skills to teach. So yeah, I think I had that part, and I'm big on teacher training. Thank you. I think that's enough.
Thanks very much, Mbali. I want to add on to what you said, because that's some of the responses that I gave them in terms of Elena, who is blind, being a surgeon. But I also want to add, because that's the question I posed to the student. I asked the student, I said, apart from me giving you this lecture, have you ever sat down at any point in your life to think, how can someone with visual who is blind become a surgeon? He said no. I said, so if you don't think about it, how are we ever going to find a solution? At one point, did we ever think a person who is blind could read Braille? When you go to the beginning of the lecture, those aspects where we talk about the history of how disability was viewed in the former times, you will see that there's a point in time where we never thought a person who is blind can ever read, but until Braille came into place. What disability challenges us is it challenges us to think radically different. Disability may challenge us to radically think different around how surgery is done. I'm not saying that right now I have the answer to say, okay, no. What I ask the students is that if you don't think about it, we'll never find a way which things can be done differently. But what Mbali spoke about is those are some of the ways we can start to approach it. By the time we may find a different way of doing surgery. Think about artificial intelligence. You never know. Okay, so let's take Sibonelo as the last person, then we end off because we are 1 minute out. Sibonelo, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are. Hey, okay, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of segregation, on my side, I doubt that the segregation on special schools was meant purposefully. As the presenter mentioned earlier, that most of special schools were created due to missionaries. I think back then it was the system that was there to accommodate vulnerable students who come from disadvantaged areas, because if you look into the system, how things were happening before. People with disabilities were not accommodated. So that's where the parts of social model and medical model took place, whereby people with disabilities are viewed as people with disabilities that must be grouped together in order to benefit from education as well as for social economy. So within that concept of special schools, that's where a lot of systems of disability inclusion took place, such as segregation, because there in special schools, remember that there is full support of reasonable accommodation and how people with disabilities must be accommodated. Hence, we saw on previous videos, especially the one on the documentary of the Cut of Lunch, whereby it was emphasizing about the special school that had caretakers back then that had full support. So, in a nutshell, also, I still don't understand, like how I think it was Alice mentioned earlier. That's why the system is still continuing these days, even though things have changed. But I'd like to say that it's also part of colonization, of which is still taking place, because if you could look it into mainstream schools, like how it's happening, we've got public mainstream schools as well as private mainstream schools. Whereby public mainstream schools, it's got like, for me, it's a basic education system that is taking place mostly in public schools because they're run by the government system. Whereby if you find in private schools, there's a lot of instance full of education system that supports learners out there. So it's another question that we need to impose that while still colonization is still taking place in our education system, because it's prior to the special school that we currently have. So I like to say that in order for us to decolonize this system, it's only a matter for us to take the knowledge that we have here and conduct the researches and expose it into the inclusive education. How can we make it best for our education system to be diverse, inclusive, and mainstream? Thank you.
So, Bonello, you touched in an area that I'm very passionate about, but I've not had time to go in. That is colonization. Colonization. Especially when we live in a context where we are so rich in resources. Because it boils me up that Africa has so much, we actually have enough resources to be able to actually radically change our educational system to be fully inclusive. Because if you note, that's one of the major things that we talk about all the time. Even when we talk about special education, if you look at it, lack of resources. We talk about education, everybody getting an education, lack of resources, lack of money, lack of funding. But it's not lack of resources. It's lack of misdirected resources. It's lack of misdirected resources. And that's why one of the projects I'll be working on, if I have the time, is to link to political science, disability and political science. Because looking at why is it that, leveraging our resources to provide the resources for disability inclusion, so that we stop this talk of lack of resources in special schools, lack of resources in mainstream schools, lack of enough teachers. We don't have the money to train teachers. We don't have the assistive technology. All these things that hinges on money and resources is because of decolonization. Decolonization that looks at, okay, how are we making sure that the vast resources we have, both material, manpower in the African continent, is not being used for Africans. Yeah. So let me not go further. Let's not go further with that because we've gone 4 minutes in. Thank you, everybody, for the participation today. And like I said, Nathan and I were started looking at the draft assignments. I'll be giving you feedback soon, and then also giving you feedback on the other aspects of things which you've done. But keep engaging and keep participating, and we'll see you on Thursday. So look at questions and areas of clarification you want to pose to Benedict on Thursday, and come with that on Thursday. Cedric, last question.
Yeah, just one quick question. Next week, I'm going away. I'm on leave, so I will be away, but I will be joining on Tuesday. I'm just concerned about the recordings. I see the others is not available yet.
Yes, because we are struggling with space. We're struggling with space, getting space to be able to, but I'm working on it. And also sometimes the captions are not coming out, like the other one for the second part, I pulled it up, but the captions did not come out, so I had to redo it from scratch. Yeah. So that's why I advise people, please come to class. Come to class, because the recordings might not always be available on time. But Lynette and I, we are working on it, and we are raising the issue further with the university body in terms of the recordings being available immediately. Okay. It will be available, but it's just that it will take a little bit of time.
Okay.
To get it done. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening. And we'll see you all on Thursday. Please come with your questions for Benedict on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night, everyone.
you. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Good night.